And, we talked about the thing, and you said in Singapore we don't have indigenous thing. Is it because, except for table tennis or something where we have that, there's been an incredible transformation if you look at the number of people who are running on the roads today compared to even 15, 20 years ago. That's one thing that I think you can see where people are participating. But otherwise, here at least in Singapore, we tend to reach out, and Vijay, you come here often to commentate to the Juventus and the Liverpools. We tend to do it around the Ferraris and the McLarens. Is that ever going to change? In Singapore, do you see that changing across Asia where people are going back to your thing, homegrown Asian sports, brands? Is that ever going to change, do you think, as a group?
I do, and I think the first stage is building it. The second stage is putting a strategy in place. And contemporary with building the facilities and the infrastructure, we embarked on something called Vision 2030. Vision 2030 is not sport as a strategy, but a strategy for sport. And so basically what we're doing is telling people that don't think about us as the ends, think about us as the means. So when we go and talk to the different government agencies, and to use the point that Vijay has, when you talk about families, so much so the conversation in a typical dining table in Singapore and India is, have you done your homework? Have you finished your assignment? Have you done your applications? Have you done all of this? And the kids sort of quickly eat and they rush away. But then when you sit down and say, look, I loved watching you play today. The six that you hit over the boundaries was fantastic. Or the try that you scored in rugby. It creates a different atmosphere. And we don't have enough of those conversations there. And I think therein lies the problem as much with the parents than rather the children. So I do think we're seeing a transformation. I do think that what we're doing with Vision 2030 now is creating a future-ready public. We're telling people to go out and run. We're making facilities more available. The interesting thing is I had the chance to go up to China to meet with the Minister of Sport a couple of years ago. And I was very interested to learn, how is China doing it? How are you creating all these world champions? And he came down and he said, look, I visited Singapore for the YOG and you guys are remarkable. And I said, wow, remarkable for what in sport? He said, the way that you build your sports and recreation centers around Singapore, that all the public can use them. And so if you go around Singapore, we may not yet have an Olympic champion, but the facilities available to the public. This Chinese minister basically said, I came down and I looked and I went around, we want to do this in China. I need to put in 250,000 cities, what you guys have done in Singapore, and you guys are a template and model for us. So yes, we don't have the Olympic champion, we don't have the world champion, but we're getting there, and hopefully with all of your help, we'll get there sooner.
And Vijay, how you're seeing this in many sports across Asia?
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, we follow that wonderful Olympic adage, which the late Avery Brundage said, and that was, it's not the winning that counts, but the taking part. And we in India and Asia like to take part in everything. The problem is, when we compete internationally, we have to follow the great Vince Lombardi saying, who said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. So, depending on how we start out our lifestyle, and as Richard just said, we did our homework at night, but before we went to bed after our homework, I had to practice the ball toss for 20 minutes. So I had to practice my service ball toss for 20 minutes before I went to sleep.
And this is your mother?
From my mother. And the interesting thing of when we were growing up is, of course, sport isn't what it is today, but people used to constantly say to us, yes, you play tennis, what do you do for a living? And I suppose after my first professional win, they didn't ask that question anymore, but my late grandmother used to always say, why do you have to go so far to lose? We still haven't been able to answer that one, but I think to a great extent we have to understand that society also drives what we think and how we live. And to a great extent, sport is wonderful, and it's honestly not the Sports Council's job to be able to create a Wimbledon champion or a All England champion in badminton or in table tennis, whatever it is, but it is more a question of having families play the sport and bring communities together. I think that is the job of being able to be a good athlete or a good sportsman across all of Asia. But when we start to compare ourselves to the Western world and we say we want to be the best when we compete overseas, or play in great teams, or to play individual sports that I always compare, compare it to running an entrepreneurial business as an individual, it's very, very difficult because the equation completely changes. Now it's a question of, does social structure get in the way of us? You know, I've lived in the US now for 35 years, so I'm very much a part of being Indian, being home in India every month. There is no month I go without being in India and Asia. And I continue to do that, and I follow sport very carefully, and I try to impress upon every family that sport needs to be a part of your life. But my kids grew up in the US. Unfortunately, they wanted to play tennis. My wife, originally Indian, coming from Colombo and from Sri Lanka, said, yes, you can play tennis, but did you do your homework? So we went through this, and I would play with him very early in the morning, my first son, and he started to play, and at 10 years old, he said, I want to be a professional tennis player. And I said, well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is, I'm your father. I said, the bad news is, I'm your father. So he fully understood this. We went through the entire program of working with the guy constantly, about 15, 16 years old. And I thought he was getting better. All his friends were ranked in the top 5 in Southern California. He was ranked in the top 150. So my wife finally said to me one morning, I think he needs to get a good coach. So, but I did think he was getting better. I'm getting to a point here, and he was going to a very, very good school, which was hard to get into. And the great Sally Ride had gone to the school, and there were some wonderful people who had come out of the school. And I went to the school dean, and I said to him, I need to take my son to play tournaments in Asia, Manila, Bangkok, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, these junior ITF tournaments. And we'll be gone for 7 weeks. Is it okay that he doesn't do his homework? And the dean said, no, it's not a good idea. There's a lot of work at the school and so on and so forth. Anyway, I decided to take him. We came back, forced him to do his homework. The boy couldn't do his homework. He was working, doing homework till 3 o'clock in the morning, playing with me at 5:30 in the morning, and both of it was suffering. At the end of the day, I decided in 10th grade, and parents, you don't have to do this. I decided 10th grade that I was going to take him out of this prestigious school and let him finish his last couple of years in homeschool because I thought he could do well in a particular sport. And at this point in time, my wife started to look for medication for me because she thought there was something completely wrong with me at this point. Anyway, to cut to the chase, he hadn't won anything big up until then. And at 18 years old, he won the American Junior Championships. He became America's #1 junior. But the true punchline is that 72 hours after winning the American Junior Championships, he got 52 scholarships across the US. From Harvard,
Wow.
Yale, Princeton, and Dartmouth, all the way to Stanford and Berkeley. And to which Stan Smith, the great Stan Smith, had a wonderful saying. He said, it is much better to have a good serve than a good GPA.
Is this going to happen in Singapore, Richard? I mean, if you have a good serve in table tennis, are you going to get into NUS?
It's starting. Frankly, I think when we look at it, Singaporeans have always been very good academically, but the requirements are much wider. How wide are people? And if I look at the number of Singaporeans going to US colleges, swimming scholarships, tennis scholarships, golf scholarships, it's starting. And I think the local universities, NUS, NTU, SMU, are all perking up, saying, look, we want something more. And I remember as a young banker, in my dark days, going for an interview. And the boss came, and I was fully expecting him to talk to me about discounted cash flows, talk about equity markets, capital markets. And he said, which operas do you listen to? Which sports do you play? So frankly, the opera, I was completely stumped, but he said sport. I said, well, I run. And I ran in Oregon, and he says, oh, great, tell me about that. So at the end of the interview, I asked him, I said, I was fully prepared to discount cash flows in my head. Why did you do that to me? And he said, look, Our customers are people. Our customers want to relate to people that are like them. All our customers play sport, go to the opera, have pursuits outside of discounting cash flows. Unless you can connect with them, you're not going to be worth anything to me. And you've proven to me that you can actually do something other than spreadsheets, so you have a chance here. So I think sport is important, and I fully agree with what Vijay says.
And Sam, I'm going to ask you this in a very personal way. Father, professional cricketer, mother, New Zealander, who comes from a sporting country. You went to Harvard. From a personal point of view, not from a MasterCard, sport, study, what were you taught at like home?
It's a great question. My father always had a funny story, which is when I got to that question of should I go to play professional cricket or study? And he said that one of his greatest achievements was his sponsorship deal that he had with Coca-Cola in 1979. And as a Pakistani, going to Australia in 1979 to play for South Australia was a very big deal. And Coca-Cola had decided to sponsor him. And the big deal was he got $1 a run. $1 a run. Now, the same player in South Australia today, there was a competition 2 years ago where they had $50,000 a run. So if you think about the multiple change in that money in that time, it's incredible. But when we're having that discussion, he's saying to me the risk and reward versus that $1 a run was that in the contract, if he got injured, the contract was over. So the whole premise of how you protect sportsmen in Asia is very, very important. We've come from, I guess, a history of nation building over the last 20 years, be it India, Singapore, China. And when you're nation building, you're working 6, 7 days a week. And your parents are working extremely hard for you to get an education. As we transform now in Asia and our nations are being built, it is very important that our children do play sport for their health. And it's increasingly important that the corporations work with governments to build those sporting facilities, to enable those kids to play, and then have that choice. The second thing that's happening now is that you can get an education and play sport at the same time. And actually they're hand in hand, which is fantastic. The third thing is the beauty about sport. It still gives kids from an underprivileged background the chance to make it and the chance to go to universities. And that's something that I think corporations and governments still find very, very important from a sporting perspective.
Which brings me to actually a very interesting thing, and Sundar and I were talking about this before he came out here. The IPL, and just picking up this whole thing of transformational, underprivileged kids, etc. Lots of people have come up through the IPL. Lots of sports stars have come up whom we've never heard of, and they're all making, millions or whatever it is that they're making. So how do you see that? I mean, how was the IPL actually achieved and took a game that was, well, it was always a big craze, was played by a relatively fewer set of people, and now made it like, something where parents are willing to say, I'm okay to sacrifice, your studies for a couple of years to go and play the, make it big in cricket.
That's
How have you
interesting.
seen
While the perception of cricket has always been big in India, I want to bust that bit, the bit of myth. Go back into history. The 20 years ago, 94, 95, India didn't have the kind of money that we have today in cricket. Until possibly 10, 12 years back, we still didn't have the money. Until early 90s, possibly late 80s, India had to pay a guarantee fee to get West Indies, Australia and England to tour India. We had to pay a guarantee fee for them to turn up in India. I mean, the world order is different now, but the fact is, unless people in the local market start to play the sport will never become big. And it started to become big because there was an inspiring moment in Indian cricket, which is the 1983 World Cup win, which transformed a few things. But the rest of the ecosystem developed alongside. The television boom that happened in the early 90s, the satellite television, the broadcasters, the ability for people to start seeing the sport as against just listening to it on radio made a transformational difference to the sport. And the role of technology, we cannot discount in building sport. While infrastructure and the ability to get the sport to as many people are equally important, to get that gem from back of beyond Ranchi or Meerut or Muzaffarnagar is as challenging. I mean, it's a wonderful story about Vijay's son, who had the opportunity and who had the ability and therefore came up trumps. It is also important as sports administrator for us to look at the guys who possibly don't have that level of opportunity, can't get to the best school, but have the aptitude and the appetite and the willingness to go the distance despite the conditions not being available to them, the level of exposure not available to them. That's what we try and do, that's what we try and facilitate. Look at cricket, sport played by 10 countries at best, 15 members to a team. You're talking about a sport totally played by 150 people at the highest level of competitiveness. And if you're in a country of 1 billion plus, like India, you have to be one of the 15. And if you're born in an era of Sachin, Saurav, Rahul and Anil, 4 slots are gone for 20 years. So you're effectively competing for one of the 11. So where we are is, as the sport matures, the 150 people who play the sport at the highest level of competitiveness need to become bigger. So in India, you had 15 names who played the sport at the highest level. What IPL has done is 8 teams, 20 players, Indian players per team. It's opened up that opportunity to 200 to 300 people and more aspirants, from the next generation. That is what is the challenge for us. How are we able to grow the game, not only in terms of viewership, but also in terms of participation, give them the opportunity for them to perform at the highest level. And that's the role that IPL performs in Indian cricket. As the inscription on the trophy says, Yatra Pratibha, Apsara Prapnotihi, where talent meets opportunity. We will give you the opportunity, put you under the lights, put you under pressure. If you are able to perform, and if you have the talent, you will get noticed, you will get the opportunity. Today, when a guy gets picked up for an Indian team, national team, there aren't many questions about who is he, where is he from, because people have seen him perform, people know what he's capable of, and people know the role that he'll perform in the side. That is what is going to help you grow the sport, take it to the masses, and also get people to live their aspirations and dreams.
So, which brings me to an interesting question, but I think it's probably because, I have a lot of questions from here. I know someone get Piyush a mic, he wants to ask a question, but I also have a few questions from the audience, and I did have one thing that I wanted to talk to you about. So there's a lot already. It seems to me that the China-Singapore model is the government will go and will create the hardware. What Sundar is talking about in the whole IPL is it's a commercially driven model. You make the opportunities, and because money comes in, demand gets created and people are kind of coming up to play this. And it's a totally different model, but I don't want to go there. I actually want to spend some time on this whole idea of the city and the sport. I mean, the IPL has started the franchise. Vijay, I know you're working on a tennis league in India. You've got kabaddi and hockey and badminton all coming up around cities, which is one model. Then you've got the whole Olympic. We held the Youth Olympic Games. We are, Rio is spending a huge amount of money, the Olympic kind of a model. And then we have the F1, Wimbledon, which are all associated with cities. I mean, cities and sports seem to have something. So what is the right model if you're in a city and say, I want to develop a sporting culture, Melbourne's a great sporting city, highest per capita consumption of sport or something in the world I've read. So how do you do it from a city perspective? How do cities and sport, actually start to gel with each other as you build these leagues and, events?
Well, let me take a shot at it. Well, first of all, when we talk about sport in India, we leave cricket out of the equation. Okay, because obviously we all know it's not a sport, it's a religion. And, when 80% of the sponsorship goes to cricket, so 90%, excuse me, I was wrong, Sundar, sorry. 90% goes to cricket, everyone else shares in the other 10%. But considering when we started many, many years ago, when we were so excited to leave Bombay with 3.5 pounds in our pocket, and we had to be able to win in the afternoon to be able to eat at night, which is why I remained thin for most of my life. Today, of course, I'm making up for it. That's a different story. My point is that when you look at the growth of a sport in India, it is very, very important to have a solid grassroots level program. Even if you picked in India, which is such a large country, that we're able to pick 30, 40 cities in the country and say, this is what we need to do. And if we also have to be aware of the fact that to excel in a particular sport, there must be something that puts us in the category of being able to excel there. Can we excel in tennis? Can we excel in badminton? Can we excel in table tennis? Can we excel in cricket? Can we excel in running? Can we excel in the 100 meters? When we pick the disciplines in the Olympics, you know, we shouldn't go back to the old Avery Brundage of participation, you know. We have to look at the sports that we can win in. And can we compete with the Caribbeans or the Africans in running? Is it possible to do that? I don't know, I'm just asking the question. But our girls have done it. The Kerala girls have been brilliant as far as running is concerned. When you look at cricket, have the players come from one particular part of the country? Have you look at tennis, do they come from, you know, one particular part of the country? And I think we've got to look at these things and then try to excel and say, we find ourselves, is it a coincidence that we excel in shooting, in archery, in chess? There's no movement involved in either one of the three sports. Now, but there is incredible movement involved in badminton. I think Saina Nehwal has been an exception in this incredible sport, what she's been able to achieve in all of India and Asia. Absolutely outstanding. But, you know, I mean, I know we're running short on time here, but I do want to leave with three very important points that I just wanted to make. One, I know most of you know Alan Wilkins, but I do want to wish him and Susie a very, very happy marriage day today. They're getting married today, so I do want to say that. If it ever goes out on tape, I want them to hear it. The second thing is, to families, I would suggest very strongly, don't ever, ever curtail the dream of your child. If the child, boy or girl, wants to do anything that he or she wants to do, truly, truly be behind that initiative of the child. And thirdly, what we have to learn across Asia and across to India and Asia is that when an athlete has represented a country for a period of time, it is very, very, very important that he doesn't die in poverty. He needs to be looked after to the end of his life because he has done his country proud.